Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brad Feldman, play-by-play commentator and executive producer for New England Revolution Television in the Boston area, and I'm really pleased and honored to be moderating this important discussion this afternoon. I want to introduce our panelists first because it's really about what they have to say, and I was really impressed when I saw the lineup. I'm going to start with somebody whom I've known for longer than I care to admit. His name is actually Nick Gates, despite what you might have seen on the slide. I'm sorry, that was just a little wind up there. I control everything at Soccerex, and I just wanted to see if you noticed, and you didn't, so that worked a treat. But he's the founder of Coaches Across Continents, global collaboration of communities on 6 continents that uses their education outside the classroom programs to impact United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, among other activities. I really encourage you to speak to Nick if you have a chance afterwards, and we'll hear more about what Coaches Across Continents does. He's also the biggest Middlesbrough supporter that you'll ever meet, and I'm not exaggerating. When I met him, he was a BNOC soccer guy at Harvard. So that's a few years ago.
A long time ago.
A long time ago. And next to him, Evan Whitfield, successful attorney in the Chicago area, also executive board member for the MLS Players Association, vice president of equity, alumni relations, and engagement for the Chicago Fire of MLS. He played at Duke in MLS for the Chicago Fire and Real Salt Lake and for the U.S. Olympic team. And this is the part that I'm going to struggle with. Nadim Anuoha. Did I get it? Close enough? Sorry, man. He's a guy who I covered when he played at Real Salt Lake, but he had a very successful playing career, as most of you know. Former Manchester United, Sunderland, QPR, as well as Real Salt Lake defender. Big in media in the UK with the BBC, The Athletic, ESPN, and was playing in Major League Soccer in June 2020 when the Black Players for Change demonstration to open the bubble in Orlando caught so much attention. So he was part of that push and initiative, and I'm hoping to hear more from him about that time in MLS, because I think it's germane, very important to what we're discussing here. And last but not least, Edleen John of the Football Association. She's Director of International Relations, Corporate Affairs, and a co-partner for equality, diversity and inclusion at the FA. All of these people know more about the subject we're discussing than I do, so I'm going to try to go against my instinct to talk the whole time and cue these people, tee these people up to speak about what they know best. And they're in discussing this topic of social action and social justice in sport and in soccer. Beforehand, there were a range of topics that the panelists wanted us to touch on. So I may bounce around a little bit, but if things catch a certain flow, then we'll just go with it, because I really want it to be driven by the panelists. Since I've already mentioned it, Nadim, the players, I think in MLS, caught attention worldwide with that incredible 8-minute and 46-second display before the first game in the bubble. A lot of athletes in a lot of different leagues and other sports also took the risk and made the choice to demonstrate for social justice. But of all the things that happened globally, I think that was the one that caught the most attention. I work in MLS, so maybe I have a skewed vision. But it's a two-part question for you to start. First of all, what was the perceived risk of backlash and blowback from inside the sort of players' bubble? And then now, nearly 2 years on, do you feel that has sparked sort of at least the beginning of a transformation? Obviously, we're nowhere close to where we need to be, but did it open the discussion the way the players were hoping it would?
Okay, so before we go any further, my friend's in the crowd and he's going to understand why I'm saying this. I didn't play for Manchester United, it was Manchester City.
Did I say United?
There's a big thing
here. Say United.
I get Star Trek and Star Wars wrong all the time, too.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, that's bad. No, I do know that's bad.
I couldn't let it go.
I'm a Liverpool supporter, so maybe it was like a subconscious, but I apologize.
No, that's perfectly fine. I think a lot of the stuff which you said is taking me back to that time, and 2020 was it was a very important year for lots of different people for lots of different reasons, whether it's to do with social injustice, whether it's to do with the pandemic itself. In the USA, it was the election year. There was a lot that was going on. So there was a lot being said, and I think for the players, that gesture at the start of the MLS's back tournament was the most visible thing in the MLS maybe that they've ever done.
Definitely.
But it was part of other things that were coming. And for example, there's basically sports boycott in August to show support for the Milwaukee Bucks, when all sport for that day basically stopped. And that was a bigger moment for, say, us in the MLS at Real Salt Lake, because we aligned with basically every other team in the whole nation. But then after the game, our owner went onto the radio and criticized every single one of us. And that, I think, leads into one of the aspects which you mentioned, which is, do players feel comfortable speaking up about things which they believe in? And I think overall the answer is no. And that's because I think it works in two ways. As a player, you understand you have a platform. Not everybody wants a platform, but then as well as having a platform, you also have an opinion. And sometimes you believe that you live in this society and you work for an organization where you can say what you believe and you can go and do things together and not face criticism. But I saw this myself because, again, in 2020 was the year when, say, lots of people within MLS were kneeling. But there were some of my teammates who believed in the cause but were scared to kneel because they were being told that if they knelt, they were un-American. But me from the outside, I thought that the right to peacefully protest is basically one of the constitutions of what it is to be an American. But they were still so worried about that, and they knew as a consequence the way that the clubs would work. If they received criticism from the outside, the club are more likely to criticize them than they are to criticize the people who are criticizing their own players. And I think for those guys within the team, like, we always have tons of conversations, we spend so much time together, but there's a real fear of being able to share your opinion. And it's not like, how can you be in that situation when you fear, as I say, being able to say something which matters and say something which you believe in and everyone else believes in as well? I think that's the sort of danger, because for players themselves, it's very, very quickly you start being told to shut up and dribble and all that type of stuff. But then when the platform's being used for other things, they say that's fine. But sports, life, like, whether people like it or not, their favorite sportsmen, like for the younger people especially, they look at them as role models. They look at them as people to sort of gain insight from. Like, if you see Steph Curry hit a shot from the logo, you'll try and hit a shot from the logo. Like, that's the importance of Steph Curry. And I think for players, you know, they understand the importance of some of the things that they can do, but they're not comfortable enough to be able to go and do it because they don't have the support of a lot of people within an organization. And I think that's where the difference is, because some of the best organizations, the players feel they can be themselves, they can be more open, they can be more honest, because the club is based around pillars which make it a place where you want to work, as opposed to a place where you do work and you fear for your job, because fearing for your job is never going to bring out the best results. And lo and behold, the places with the best results tend to have the best systems in play.
Edleen, one of the things that the FA has had to deal with, unfortunately, in the aftermath of last July's Euro final was online abuse. And in that case, it was the result that triggered it. Wasn't even a demonstration by the players. Do you feel like that becomes a limiting factor in terms of players' willingness to speak out when it's not even because they took a knee, it's just they lost the game on penalties, to roll the dice, and some young players took the risk of stepping up to try to win it, and then they got blasted. You have a great ambassador in Marcus Rashford, but he has become a lightning rod for this stuff. He's able to shrug it off the way most people aren't. He has a strength of character that most people don't, and he's gone on to do a lot of really great things. But how much do you think that now in this social media age, that kind of online backlash it has a chilling effect?
I think the online backlash that players and people across football and across sport face is significant in terms of what they're willing to speak up for, what they're willing to stand for, and the pressures that come along with that. So I always say we have to remember that whilst we think of sports people as people that are untouchable and people with, of course, significant skill, at the end of the day, they're humans with feelings, with families, with friends around them. And actually looking at what happened after the Euros final and seeing the abuse not just as a spectator and somebody who uses social media myself, but then actually being able to connect with the individuals afterwards, what you recognize is the psychological impact of online abuse is pretty significant, right? And when you're asking people to go on and perform their skill or their role or their job to the top level of their ability, and then receive such backlash from hundreds and thousands of people across the globe for making a mistake in our job, which, let's be clear, we all do. And let's be clear, it wasn't actually even a mistake. We should be celebrating that a team got to the final and did better than a team have done in many years before. But instead, you had individuals who were not only disappointed by the result of the match, but then had to go home, turn on their phones or turn on their computers and see the world chastising them in a way that is brutally unfair. And so part of the campaign and part of the things that we've been talking about in the UK is the need for social media organisations to take some accountability and responsibility for what is happening on their platforms. We've already seen outside of sport people committing self-harm, people committing suicide by virtue of what's happening on social media platforms. And I keep saying I don't want it to get to a stage where a prominent footballer or a prominent sports person has to kill themselves before we're going, actually, we need to take this seriously. So yeah, it does numb what people can say, it minimises their voice, and it does create a culture of fear where people cannot speak or use online platforms and have that freedom of speech that we always talk about. But because people are able to do that behind a veil, it also creates a culture of impunity online where perpetrators are able to go on, say whatever they want, and face no real world consequences.
Evan, I covered you as a player, and we also crossed paths as broadcasters. Now you've moved on to bigger and better things, but you've been very involved as a council administrator, advisor to a lot of these groups that have emerged from the last few years. Black Players for Change, SCORE, I think is the other one, as well as MLS Players Association. So you get more of a sort of big picture, overarching view of it than players looking from the inside out. What is your sense of now, what is it, 20 months on or so, where things stand in terms of the momentum, the perception? We're not seeing players in MLS take a knee anymore. How much change is there from your standpoint, and where does it, what needs to happen to sort of keep the momentum going?
Yeah, I think that, just kind of add on to what you two have said, that just the mere act of speaking out and demonstrating was monumental because of all these fears and the precarious nature of professional sports, and everybody's always vying for their starting position or staying on a team or their position in the future when they retire, right? So just the mere act of the players doing that, I can't overstate how important that was. I also think that systems are self-correcting, and it's very difficult to change status quo. So even in Major League Soccer instance, the organization, and this is not a criticism, Major League Soccer very quickly recognized that it was important for the league to support the players, right? So, there was this very courageous act, and the league very quickly, co-op is not necessarily the right word, because I'm not trying to take away from the players, but they very much quickly got into line and supported the players and helped with the funding of Black Players for Change, and were able to, use their, allow this to kind of conform with what they're espousing, right? Which is like, this is an open game for everyone. And for the last 2 years or so, the MLS has done, I think, has responded well to this, right? So, Black Player for Change is funded in part, from MLS. They have revamped the diversity hiring initiative, which includes more of a focus on Black candidates. At least one Black candidate must be interviewed. They created the DEI collective, so 2 representatives from each club are meeting, I think, quarterly to speak about these issues and continue to address them. And then I know the league is extremely proud of the recent Black Bank initiative, where they took a $25 million loan out from a syndicate of Black banks to create wealth in Black communities. So to say all those things, there has been a lot of positive support from organizations, but if you look at the data from 2000 to this year, which is all on Google, if you want to take the time to go through and look at all the teams, coaching staffs, we have in MLS only one additional black coach at my organization, Ezra Hendrickson. The number of racialized Latino coaches has actually gone down in MLS since 2020. MLS still has 0 women coaches. NWSL has 0 black or Latinx women coaches. So just from a data perspective, when you ask me how much have things changed in 2 years, I would have to say not enough, or really not at all, despite all of the organizational support that has occurred and all of the messaging and the goodwill that people definitely have been talking about.
Speaking from where I sit and where I work, the Revolution have, I think, tried to address it. They created this Revolution Players Collaborative Fund with a bi-monthly donation of $20,000 to local grassroots organizations. And what they did is they empowered the players to designate which organizations, and they're like, this will keep going as long as you proactively take the lead. And it's a small but not insignificant amount of money. Also, we're very proud that Earl Edwards Jr., the goalkeeper, was elected president of Black Players for Change recently, and he's been a great spokesman and advocate. And there's more diversity in the coaching staff with the Revs than there was before by a lot. But there's still a ways to go, as you say. I guess looking at the different organizations, it seems like different teams have different amount of sort of impetus behind it. And the question is, to what extent can these groups hold the league and the teams accountable to stick to the policies that have been sort of stated publicly when the results don't reflect what the stated goals are yet. So I don't want to jump all over the place too much, but one of the things we were talking about, Nick, last night was how do people say, well, I want to do something, I want to be an ally, but I also do something more than just sort of show up and retweet and wear T-shirts and armbands. What do you like beyond the sort of the walls of professional football? What do you see as the steps that people can take?
Yeah, so I come at it from both angles. I was an executive for Middlesbrough, so I've seen what it's like to try and have change inside professional football. And then I made what I thought was a good decision to set up Coach Across Continents 15 years ago. And I thought it was going to be easy to have change. But change takes a long time. And so the starting point is to identify the problem, is to get publicity, is to make the awareness. But then the trick is what to do afterwards. And I think the players have an opportunity, and if they show good sense, is to join the amazing organizations that are out there, the Coaches Across Continents, Grassroots Soccer, Scored, all of those amazing groups, and lend their voice to the experts who are doing the work on the field. And I think we're very fortunate with CAC that we get to do the fun stuff. You guys get to make everyone aware of what's going on, and then together we collaborate to say what can be the solutions. And unfortunately, the big thing, as we're all learning, is it does take time.
Are you seeing an uptick in people showing interest towards taking a year with your organization?
Yeah, what we're seeing, and it's a little bit of good and bad, we're seeing a lot of people identifying problems. The challenge then is, are those people going to commit to being part of the solution? So yes, we're seeing a lot more. We set up a program called Step Up to bring in female professional players because their voice is very, very powerful for change. And we've already taken in the last 3 months, 10 new players who are getting involved in our projects around the world. So yes, we're seeing definitely an uptake in that. In the men's game, it's a big challenge because brands are involved. If you make a decision that could alienate you from a set of the public, you only have a 10-year, and in a good career, a 10-year earning span. And so we're watching and working very, very closely with them. And with the clubs, I think the clubs are now started reaching out to the organizations who are doing the grassroots work and are saying, let's partner together because the collective voice is going to be more powerful.
Getting back to hiring, because obviously, athletes of color have had tremendous success on the field now for few generations. That opened up in a different way earlier. But when you talk about diversity hiring initiatives, like it strikes me, and this is just my point of view, that it's not just what the right thing to do is, it's that there are all these capable applicants out there, and if candidates of color are not being given an opportunity to succeed or fail at the same rate as white male candidates, then it's much harder to change the perceptions that we're all trying to fight against. You know, I'll go back to you, Evan, but I also want to hear from you, like in terms of, you know, you're doing media, you're in the FA, and you're involved as an attorney on a number of different levels. So there are plenty of people who can do the jobs and do them very well, but there's all this unconscious bias in hiring that we know about. How earnest do you believe the efforts in England and the US are right now to get it to get it towards where it needs to be?
So I think the passion and the motivation is there. Do I think the actions always follow through across different organisations and across different sports? No. Additionally, I don't think it's just about giving people opportunities. I think that is absolutely a significant part of it, but it's also making sure that when those people are given those opportunities, there's the support structure around them to help them to succeed. And we have to also remember that people from certain historically underrepresented groups are then measured by a different bar compared to individuals from majority groups, right? So the reality is there are certain things that I cannot get away with doing that a white male counterpart would get away with doing. And that's part of the challenge that we have to be open and honest about, and we have to face, and we have to talk about unconscious bias, and we have to talk about microaggressions, and we have to talk about the stereotypes that exist for individuals that go into those roles. But I do think on an organisational level, we have a responsibility to provide that access of opportunity and to say, how can we support people to then deliver whatever it is we've brought them in to do? I think it's something that we're definitely passionate about from an English football landscape, and we launched a Football Leadership Diversity Code in the back end of 2020, which focuses on hiring practices and looks at setting clear targets, not quotas, but targets around senior leadership and team operations, and looking at our coaching structures to make sure that, frankly, what we see represented on our football pitches in England is then represented off the pitches. Now, are we there? Absolutely not. But what that has done is it's created an opportunity for transparency and increased accountability. And our media in the UK can be pretty brutal. And so the reality is when clubs or organisations are not hitting those targets, the media have the opportunity to use their voice and to say, X club has not hit their target, and they can help to support and be those agents for change. And I think what I'd like to see more of going into 2022 and further is actually the media sometimes focusing on them being a catalyst to support organisations, to support sports, to support individuals, to drive forward the change that everybody was talking about wanting to see in 2020 when we had that kind of big moment across the world.
Yeah, it's tough speaking after you because you speak very well. I'm going to be a little more, I guess, less polished. I think that, you know, is there a motivation there for individuals? Yes, that's what they say because we hear them say it, right? Are the actions there to back it up? I think Edleen said not always. And I'll be a little more direct. Like even with the diversity leadership initiative in the FA, that's a voluntary, right? So like, why is it voluntary? Why isn't it mandatory, right? And that's not a criticism, it's a question.
Yeah, because legally we can't in the UK. So we have a different legal legislative landscape, which means we cannot make it mandatory. If we could, best believe it would be.
Right. And you know, we have the same kind of legal constraints in the United States, right? Like our employment law is based on equality, not equity, right? Which is why the whole affirmative action thing is difficult, but I don't want to like digress too much. So, you know, I think that, and I'm kind of all over the place, but like this idea that change takes a long time, and the idea that everybody wants something to happen, and then the idea that nothing is really happening, there's an incongruence there that doesn't really sit well with me,
Yeah.
right? And I just have to keep asking the question, why is this? Why is this? Why is this? And ultimately, and you know, people like Edleen and myself who are in administration are, you know, to blame in part, right? It's because we have decided not to do these things, right? And we have a lot of different stakeholders in brands and owners and federations and all these things who have says. And for whatever reasons, Gwen, the question you guys should be asking yourself is why? Why aren't these people coming into confluence with an agreement to do something? I don't know, right? Change does not have to take a long time. Change can happen quite quickly, right? It's a misnomer. And it's more comfortable, I think, for people to think that incrementalism is the natural progression of things. But, you know, history is replete with examples of dramatic change very quickly, right? And institutions can respond quite quickly to popular demands. In England, in Europe, there was this huge uproar when the big clubs wanted to do their breakaway league, right? They had a bunch of plans, a bunch of lawyers, a bunch of investment bankers, spent hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars setting that up. It doesn't happen overnight. It was a very intricately laid plan, and they abandoned it in 24 hours because the population did not want it. We saw a global outpouring, an uprising, whatever word you want to use, to the racial inequities and lethal policing in the United States, right? And globally, right? But the quickness of action is absent. And again, the only thing I can ask is why. I have no idea.
Nick and Nadim, you've both worked on both sides of the pond. How different, you know, what are the differences and similarities between the obstacles and challenges that soccer faces within the context of the broader society in England and UK and the US?
So I've listened to everything that's been said, and there's a sort of cynicism that exists within me, which I have to bring out in some ways, because I think the example used of Super League is a good one. But it shows to me that for lots of organizations, the effect on the bottom line is what dictates their behaviors. And that's one of the biggest hurdles, because how do you overcome that when you're somebody who can't even comprehend those bottom lines? So if there was a player at the same sort of time with the Super League who was racially abused in the Europa League, and the player for the opposition team was given like a very short ban or something, for me, he shouldn't be allowed to be playing professional soccer anywhere. Yet still, he was banned for maybe 3-4 games. Then the Super League concept comes, and then UEFA show all their might. They're saying, we're going to kick these clubs out of their leagues. We're going to do this. We're going to come down as hard as humanly possible. Well, I wonder why that is when those are the teams who sort of prop up their own leagues themselves. So I think when it comes down to, say, change and stuff that happens within society and with sport, I think the issue with sport, especially with football in the UK, is that the industry is so big and there's so much money involved that it's very hard for some of the people in key areas and organizations to say, well, we're just going to do the right thing. Because the right thing sometimes comes at a cost. And in that industry, that is everything. Like, you look at the way that, say, in England, they hire managers. Well, right, we're in trouble, we need somebody. So they go to 3 or 4 managers who have done something in the past, as opposed to somebody new. But the person that's free and available now is free and available because they just lost their job. But they're going to be the ones that will help us out of it, because there's that feeling. You know, it's very easy to make that change if you wanted to do the right thing. We're trying to do the thing that protects the money that's involved. And I think that trickles all the way through organizations. I think in the USA with soccer, it's a very big industry and there's money in it, but it's not got the same sort of feel to it. Like when a team is on the verge of going down in the Premier League and they understand it might cost them 250 million or something, they behave differently to a team that's trying to build a foundation to find success at some point in the future, like in the MLS. So I think the two situations are different and they do get behind you. But again, like the cynicism, sorry, it sounds so negative, I apologize, but the cynicism kicks in again. Because last year in the Premier League, when people were kneeling before games, they were kneeling for approximately 5 seconds before the regularly scheduled 3 o'clock kickoff. And I was hearing tons of people say, I'm tired of this now. make them stop. Just move on, what's the point? This is just this is just that. It's 5 seconds before the game that was going to kick off at the exact same moment. So for me, like, I hope for change, and there are more people in organizations who are seeking it. There are more allies now who are being able to call things out, who don't just look like me. But the reality is the journey itself is far longer than ever anticipated. But as long as we're moving in the right direction, I'm not going to be too critical of whatever method is that is getting us there. And I think that's the upside to it. But it's just a shame that, you know, the realization of where we're actually at is far different to where we hoped that we would be.
Nick, you travel the globe. I don't believe that what we're talking about is human nature. I think it's learned behavior. And I think at the root of it, sport has an opportunity to at least try to influence it, because you know, people copy their heroes and they, you know, look up to these athletes, and sport has such a spotlight on it. You travel the world. How deep does this run, and how, you know, how much opportunity does football have to lead?
Yeah, football has to do more. We're facing one of the biggest global crises we'll ever see with Russia and Ukraine, and it's fantastic to see stadiums color yellow-blue. It's fantastic seeing teams wear yellow-blue. But so what? Is that helping the refugee crisis that needs to be addressed today? I look very tired because I've spent the last 10 days in meetings trying to work out what football can do just in this situation. And so I'm a little bit cynical, having worked on all sides of football. I think football can create a painting that they're doing things, but the money that's involved now and the influence that it can have on social impact, social development, we do need football to step up and say, we're really going to do this. We're going to commit to a pathway that will lead to change. So yes, because of the power that everywhere in the world is watching MLS now, is watching English Premier League, the power of the voice of football really has to be more than it is right now. So it needs more people in positions in the clubs that have a social voice, not just a bottom line voice, not just a getting 3 points voice.
I just want to add to that. Edleen said this already, but again, I am dense, so I need to be more explicit. You know, can football do more? Yes, but you mentioned like the press, right? And you were talking about people moaning about doing something for 5 seconds, right? And I think one of the levers of power that is painfully absent is the football press deciding to focus on stories that are holding organizations and institutions and people accountable to what they're espousing publicly. If they're working with whatever brand and saying that they're going to change the world or do the impossible, whatever, and then 18 months later, nothing impossible has occurred, instead of asking about how many tackles they won, they should be, the press, including yourself, should be asking, what happened to that statement you made 18 months ago? And did you implement the processes that you said you were going to do? And what were the measurements that you used? And what was the data that you're holding yourself responsible to? And which executive is getting fired for not meeting those goals? Because you're correct, right? Everything in global football, I guess, is bottom line driven, right? What we're talking about is money. And people get paid and fired and hired based on measures against arbitrarily decided criteria for performance, right? So having the fans, having the press hold the organizations accountable for what they're espousing will go a long way, because it's that incongruence that you can't ignore it when it's publicized.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, Brad, there are some clubs now who are building that into their business model. So Angels FC in the WSL, a couple of organizations in Denmark, etc., are building that as part of their club. More than just a little statement to tick a box. They're actually living it and breathing it. And I think that's, right now we're seeing a lot of policies coming out, but we need to see them come to life. We need to see people acting on them, and fans need to act on them. It needs to be in all levels from there.
I actually had a journalist, who will remain unnamed, contact me to help him get in touch with prominent pundits who would talk about, is Marcus Rashford's social action push holding him back as a player? Fortunately, I said, listen, I don't like this topic, but I'll reach out. No, it was like, I'm not gonna speak. But we're still fighting that mentality, whereas like, shouldn't he just be thinking about football 24/7, 365? Whereas, I think from where we all sit, this guy, he's an amazing player, international footballer, and he's actually taking the steps and walking the walk that a lot of people, most people don't.
Yeah.
So that's what you're up against. And I think that, like, you're starting from steps behind if you have journalists who aren't just looking to amplify the positive, but they're looking to put what I view as a potentially negative spin on that. Mm-hmm. So, and then the question comes in is like, is it the individual journalist, is the way they've been conditioned, or is it this unseen hand of the money that's behind it? Yeah. And is that an explicit message, or are people just making the safest choice all the time?
Yeah, that's such a bad take. Is he struggling with his football because of what he's doing socially? It's such a bad take, just because, according to that logic, like, you can't be a father and be a footballer.
Right.
You can't be anything and be a footballer, because football is this all-encompassing thing where, it takes up every second of your day, and you can't even spend a moment to even think about, let alone breathing, let alone like just doing something else. I think it's so bad. And one thing I wanted to say about, say, the USA playing from a football perspective, because of the political landscape at the minute, everything is almost like team-based in the mentality. And I can see with some organizations and some people where there's something which they really believe in, that they believe is wrong, but they're scared to say it's wrong because they'll be called woke or something like that. Maybe sometimes something is just wrong, and it's not like we're team woke or we're not team woke. All this stuff exists, and it's affecting people's minds to the point where they're allowing certain things to continue on, perpetuate, which is wrong. And like that Rashford stuff, like, football is so tribal, sport is so tribal. And because of that tribalism, there's no separation in terms of right and wrong for some people. Like, Gary Neville's big, prominent guy or whatever in the UK, media, his platform's enormous. And he was saying something the other day where he said people need to realize that the social work that Marcus Rashford is doing is only as big as it is because of the badge that is Manchester United alongside it. And I thought to myself, Marcus Rashford, in his attempts, he's trying to help the whole nation, and you think people care because he's Marcus Rashford of Manchester United. Like, he's been the only positive for Manchester United for the past 2-3 years. Like, read the room. Like, this is the reality of the situation. But again, this is a prominent figure who tons of people believe in, and he speaks like, it's like a populist. He speaks like he speaks on the behalf of others, and that's what we're up against, because you never really realize how bad it is until all of a sudden you discover the normal way of thinking is a long way from like what's actually going on. But then try and have that debate with all those people that see it. Well, clearly he didn't score the free kick because he met the Queen last week. Like, how can you associate the two? Genuinely.
And it makes no sense, right? Because ultimately, whilst sports people are absolutely passionate about the sport they play, they're still doing a role and still doing a job. So imagine if we use that benchmark for everybody in society, where we said you're only allowed to have a space to talk about things within your world and within your role, and actually you can't speak outside that box at all because otherwise you're rubbish at your role, or we'll judge you in that way. It would be ridiculous. And that's the frustration. It's like we have a mechanism or a society or a media preposition that thinks that sports people are puppets and therefore can only speak about certain issues and talk about whether they're making free kicks or penalties or whatever it might be, and can't have opinions, perspectives, and views just like every other member of society.
Yeah, and just to add on to this, Brad, I think that this is, what you brought up is a good example of why representation is so important in any industry, right? So we're talking about the need for coaches to be more representative of the global majority, or institutions or teams, but the press, the sporting press, needs to be more representative of global majorities, right? Like, NWSL had this huge open secret of coach abuse, and there were plenty of players talking about that online. And it took a woman from the Washington Post, I believe, to take the time, because it was important enough to her, to write about it. Now, there's a lot of other people who work at the Washington Post and the New York Times and ESPN who are very involved in soccer who chose not to write about it. And representation matters for whatever reason, because people will take the time and the effort and do the heavy lift to discuss things and bring things that are important to them out. And when your group is very homogenous, you're just going to get that one story. And it's going to leave out all the other stories.
I think, Brad, that it is important as we're running out of time. Football is doing a lot more things. We started work with CONCACAF, Asian Football Confederation, Oceania, the FA. We're now having partnerships to allow the organizations that potentially can highlight problems to work with the organizations who can do it, that are a little bit protected from the press, that can do things that potentially MLS can't do and the FA. And so we are seeing some great changes in that. And similarly with the footballers now saying, okay, we've done our part now, but we want to do the next bit. How do we get involved with organizations who can do it, who can create the safe space for players and clubs to be involved? So I do think, I remain optimistic that we are doing good things as a goal, but a lot more needs to be done very quickly and on a bigger scale.
We only have a few minutes, and rather than ask some sort of pat, neat question, I just want to give, if there's something that we haven't touched on that you were planning to say, I want to give everybody an opportunity to do that rather than me tee you up to say what I want to lead you into. So, did we miss anything? You had mentioned fan behavior at matches.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to me, like in some parts of the world, that's improved at all in the last.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think in the days leading up to this event, I've been doing lots of thinking about it. And one thing I realized was, some of the abuse we say now has crossed the line, but some of that other abuse is fine. And I think that shows the problem, because it was allowed to happen for so long that now we're just trying to get rid of that abuse, which becomes, maybe it's racist, maybe it's sexist, maybe it's whatever. But if somebody calls you with this or calls you with that, and it says you this because you missed this penalty, that's okay though. That's not missing the mark. And I think we need to be aware of the things which we allow, and I think that's why allyship is such an important thing. Because if somebody, as I say, that doesn't look like me, sticks up for me in a room which I'm not in, because somebody has said something which has crossed the line and they understand that, there's more chance of being able to affect people on that sort of wider scale. And that's what happens, I think, more so in stadiums now. More people are acknowledging when somebody's saying or doing something wrong. It's still not as many as they say it could be. But now, you want to go to a stadium and be around people who see the game through the right sort of lenses and aren't going to cross the line. Yet still in the past, people are happy to cross the line and says, well, this is what happens when this is just the crowd, this is just what it is. So I think it's the importance of sort of understanding what's actually needed to make things better, and it's not just the case of just sitting there and allowing bad things to happen.
I mean, yeah, I guess the one thing I will say is, selfishly, I don't want to come off as too critical or negative or cynical. I can feel you wanting to balance it with some optimism.
I'm a Middlesbrough fan.
Yeah.
I have to be optimistic.
But we don't know each other. You guys don't know me out there. But the reason why I am a very hopeful and optimistic individual, it's just my way to be critical of things, right? It's that critical analysis. I only do that because I am so hopeful and desirous of these things changing, right? And I just feel like, again, it's a nuance. It's important people to take away from these conversations. Don't be so critical of individuals if they are, or don't think poorly of individuals if they're being critical. It's not like we don't love football or we're not supportive of these things. We are very much hopeful that things go right.
Yeah. And I'd like to close, I'd like to say, I'd be more negative if this room was empty. But the fact is there are people in this room, and the effect that can have in itself is very, very important.
So I'll give the challenge to people out there who look at this, and I know you're all professional, involved in football. Bri, just put your hand up. If you want to know how to get involved and make a change in football, that's our chief executive. Lauren, put your hand up. That's one of our step-up athletes who played professional football for 3 years, and she's got involved in it. Talk to them, or find myself, or find anybody here, but talk about it. We have solutions, a great group in Colombia, Goal to Soul over there. Talk to these groups who are taking on board all the parts of football and are making the change. But we do need everybody in football to be involved. So Brian loves chatting to people. find him. We're in booth 400 or something like that. Find everybody from this panel who's here for another 2 or 3 hours and ask us questions about how you can get involved, because it's going to need all of us to make this change.
And I take it one step further. I feel like I've been talking about it and talking to people for a long time, and that's great, but I'd say let's all get up and do something, right? Let's take action. I'm tired of talking. I want us to do.
Yeah.
That's the right word to leave on.
Well said.
Thank you. This has exceeded my high expectations. I really appreciate you all coming, and especially the panelists for making the time and the trip. It was great.
Fred.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.